Is Donald Trump likely to become president of the United States again? That's the question we're asking and attempting to answer today. Now, the presidential elections for 2024 for the United States kicked off yesterday with the Iowa caucus that took place, and Donald Trump is looking stronger than ever, which is why we're asking this question today. But in order to understand what the likelihood of his victory is, we have to first take a step back and understand how the US presidential elections work, which is very different from Indian elections. Now, the election of the President of the United States takes place once every 4 years on the first Tuesday in November. This year it will be the 5th of November. Traditionally, candidates make their intention to run for president known a whole year in advance, and the entire process takes almost a year. There are caucuses, there are primaries, and then there's the final election between the Republicans and the Democrats, which are the two main parties in their country. Now, the caucus and the primary is where these two parties find their main candidates. It's called the primary race. Now, it plays out between January, when it has just started now, January 15th, up to the 8th of June, in 50 American states. The key difference between a caucus and a primary is that the caucus is held by the party itself. It's sort of a private event, whereas the primary is held by the government. However, in this particular case, the crucial primaries will happen within the Republican Party because they're going to find a candidate, whereas within the Democratic Party, it's clear already that the candidate is going to be Joe Biden. Now, let's first take a look at the Republican Party and who those key candidates are within the Republican Party that are competition for Donald Trump. There's a pool of 5 candidates at this point. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy, who was one of the candidates, actually suspended his campaign as of last night, and he has pledged his support to Donald Trump because Donald Trump easily won that Iowa caucus. So let's take a look at the other candidates. There is Ron DeSantis, who is the Florida governor, Nikki Haley, former ambassador to the UN and South Carolina governor. She's the only woman in the Republican race, and Asa Hutchinson, former 2-term Arkansas governor. Now, the Democrats have 2 nominees as well besides Biden, but they're not very strong. He's expected to win that nomination process fairly easily. The other 2 are Marianne Williamson, a self-help author, and Dean Phillips, a congressman from Minnesota. There are also independent bids. There's Robert F. Kennedy, nephew of former John F. Kennedy. He ditched the Democratic presidential nomination and decided to go out as an independent. And there's also Jill Stein, who's an environmentalist, and Cornel West, who is a progressive activist and scholar. Now, there's little concern about an independent actually winning the presidency, but they do play a crucial role of eating in to the votes in crucial swing states, which is why they're important as well. Now, the important thing to remember is once the candidates are actually elected, then what happens is there's something called the Electoral College system. So it's not a simple majority. What happens is that each of these 50 states are assigned a certain number of electoral votes depending on their population. Now, altogether, there are 538 electoral votes, and a candidate needs 270 to win. For example, Texas has a total of 40 electoral votes. So whoever wins Texas gets all 40 votes. They take all of the votes from the state. And most states in the US are firmly sort of on one side or the other. They're either liberal or they're conservative, but there are some that swing from side to side. And those are the swing states really that sort of make or break the election. This year, the swing states are going to be Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Now, these are states basically that need to be watched closely because the fights are closely contested, and the winner will be sworn in inaugural day, January 20th, 2025, which means it's going to take a whole year from now before this whole thing plays out, and it tends to be really quite an event to watch. Now, let's talk about Trump. Now that I've told you how all of this works, let's talk about Trump and why it's important to understand whether or not Trump is really strong. Also, the question to ask is, can someone, an ex-president who's been impeached twice and is facing several criminal cases against him, find his way into the White House again? For Trump to win, he obviously has to first win the Republican presidential contest. The first of them began last night, like I told you, where he enjoyed a thumping majority. Now, by estimates, he has won about 51% of the votes. That's a large margin. The next rival was DeSantis, who only got 21%. Nikki Haley got 19%, and Ramaswamy got 8%. So Ramaswamy then, after his nearly 8%, pulled out of the race completely. He's not going to be contesting. He's given his pledge of support to Trump. Trump then took to his own personal social media platform and said, "Love you, Iowa, try, thank you all." Nearly 2/3 of the caucus goers apparently embrace Trump's false claims that there was voter fraud in the previous election and Biden did not legitimately win the presidency. And despite a slew of legal challenges against Trump, and I'll take you through them in a bit, more than 60% of those people believe that Trump would still be a better president even if he were convicted of a crime. So the critical takeaway is really this: neither Nikki Haley nor DeSantis really is a key challenger at this point. In the vote against Trump obviously seems divided, and there's no one really to give him a run for his money from within the Republican Party. And most of the Republican Party caucus goers apparently still buy into or find themselves as part of the campaign called Make America Great Again. Now, remarkably, unlike the 2016 race, this time Trump has apparently won across all demographics, which means that he's apparently stronger across the board. And this is apparently unheard of from a presidential candidate who's already lost one election. But remember, Trump's supporters don't actually believe he lost an election. They believe he was cheated out of that election, which is why they believe that he's going to be even stronger this time. Now, assuming that Trump does win the Republican primaries, which he seems slated to do at this point, then he will come head-to-head with Joe Biden. Remember, Joe Biden's coming under a lot of criticism for simply being too old to be able to handle this kind of pressure. There are questions about his health. There are questions about whether or not he can handle the kind of pressure that the job brings. But what's also working in Trump's favor against Joe Biden is his approval rating. The Joe Biden-led government has claimed that the economy is doing well, unemployment is down to a near historic low, that inflation is cooling off. But again, recent polls show that a lot of people don't believe this because they believe from within their homes that affordability is still not, something that, the government has delivered, that they don't believe in economic indicators, but they're not seeing the change on the ground. Now, Biden's approval ratings have hit a 15-year low, according to ABC News. This is a poll published on Sunday, just before the Iowa caucus. Now, Biden's approval rating is at 31%, and 58% of the people say they actively disapprove of him returning to office. Now, this approval rating at 31% is lower than the lowest rating that Trump faced when he was in office, which was at 36%. No president has had a rating this low since the George W. Bush administration. 26% of Americans approve of how Biden has handled the Israel-Hamas war. 48% disapprove. A substantial 25% say they don't have an opinion on the matter. On immigration, Biden's approval is down again. His approval ratings are at 18%, which is the lowest for any president since 2004. The Times has also noted a national poll estimate that shows that Trump has 47% of support, while Biden only has 40%. At the same stage, in the previous election, Biden had 48% and Trump only had 39%. So it does seem at this point that Trump is looking substantially stronger than Biden going into this election. But like I said, there are legal hurdles in Trump's way. Now, let me take you through the legal hurdles. He is facing no less than 91 felony charges in 4 indictments in 2 state courts in 2 different federal districts, all of which could potentially end in prison sentences. Now, to muddy the waters further, he also has a civil lawsuit on charges of fraud in New York that could affect his business empire. He has a defamation and a sexual assault case with writer John E. Carroll, who alleges that Trump assaulted her back in 1990. And in May 2023, the jury concluded that he was guilty of assault and defamation, and a second defamation claim is due to be tried later this month. But there are 4 key lawsuits that could affect his presidential bid. Now, these are the lawsuits. 1, in Manhattan, he's facing a case of falsifying business records. It's a case which is part of a scheme that he ran to pay hush money to Stormy Daniels, who was an adult film star. So she had sexual relationships with him back in 2016, and that's going to go to trial in Manhattan. Mishandling sensitive documents. He's facing 40 felony counts charges for removing sensitive documents of national security from the White House and taking them to his Florida estate. Thousands of documents were seized by the FBI in 2022, including 100 that were marked classified. So the charges include illegally handling those documents and botching up the FBI's retrieval of those documents. An attempt to overturn the Georgia vote, which saw the first ever mugshot of a former US president who had to turn himself into a county jail. Now, the investigation began over a leaked telephone call where Trump was heard asking an election official to find 11,000 votes for him. And finally, an attempt to overturn the 2020 elections and the Capitol insurrection. You will remember he's been criminally charged in an attempt to overturn the presidential elections and the 6th January Capitol riot. The Supreme Court in February is also hearing a case to determine whether or not Donald Trump can run for president at all in view of his engagement in the insurrection. Remember, in the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution says anyone who is engaged in insurrection and rebellion cannot hold federal office. But Trump's lawyers are arguing that this does not apply to the president. It's also important to remember that except for the insurrection charges, even if he is found guilty and sent to jail, there is no legal barrier that prevents him from becoming president of the United States, because the presidents need to only be 35 years old, natural-born citizens of the US, and have lived in the US for at least 14 years. So Trump's victory seems like a possibility at this point. The only thing standing in his way are these legal cases that he's going to have to find his way around. His supporters believe that he is being framed because he's so powerful and popular that he's being kept out of office. Now, he has framed this 2024 election battle as the final battle for America, and he's told his supporters that he will be their retribution. He has promised to pardon everyone who was charged of insurrection. According to reports, he wants to fill all posts in the White House and government agencies and civil servants with ideological loyalists. He's also previously deemed the climate crisis to be a hoax. He regularly mocks renewable energy. He also claims that he can end the Russia-Ukraine war within 24 hours of coming back to office. And this is an election that will have to be watched very, very closely. Remember, US is now involved in 2 hot wars. There's Ukraine and there's Gaza, where US is sort of playing the big brother role, and that's going to be really important going forward. And of course, relationships with the rest of the world, including with India, we're going to be watching very closely. So it starts now. You've got this whole breakdown. We're going to watch and see what's going to happen and whether Trump is going to make it into office. And at this point, the question really asking is what's going to keep him out of office, because he does seem like that train is going straight for the White House.